Hello again, Buckeye Nation. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, the Buckeyes are now, are still undefeated. The big victory over the Indiana Hoosiers that at times looked like it was going to be a cakewalk, and at other times it looked like it was going to go down to the wire. Why don't we just start out by just tell me three things about the game, good or bad, that you took away from this matchup against the mighty Hoosiers?
Okay, three things. I will say that the defense is definitely a cause of concern. So we'll put that in the bad category. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. The running game is not as consistent as it needs to be. Both Michael Weber and J.K. Dobbins had some moments, but let's just face it, like the idea of Ohio State being able to run when they want to on any of their opponents. I mean, it's, we're 6 games in, and Ohio State has still not really had a dominating performance on the ground since the season opener win against Oregon State. So I'm not going to say that that's I'm going to put that squarely down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say that, it's a concern, but I definitely, in terms of comparison to the defense, I would say that, the running game is still a positive, but it's concerning. And then this is, I don't think you can have too many more positives than Dwayne Haskins only making his 6th ever start. Came within a few yards of breaking the single game passing record long held by Art Schlichter. So Ohio State fans, I hope you're certainly enjoying the likes of Dwayne Haskins, because it's entirely possible that he may be a one and done and off to the NFL after this season.
Yeah, those are some good takeaways from the game. Obviously, they're not all good things. I'm particularly disturbed that Ohio State didn't try to get him the record when he got close. I guess they eventually did, but they threw in one of those pop passes toward the end, those little tap passes, and but other than that, they could have easily got him the record had they not run the ball on a 3rd and 9 play at one point.
Yeah, perplexing, very perplexing.
There were a couple play calls, and I guess we'll get into this a little more, but that had people asking if James Franklin had hacked into the Ohio State headsets and was calling plays. Play calling is definitely one of my takeaways. Play calling in this game was not great. It was there was a concerted effort to show the zone read quarterback runs in the first half of the game that completely got the team behind the chains, disjointed, lacking any kind of rhythm. It wasn't working. They kept going back to it, and luckily some cooler heads prevailed and they stopped calling those later in the game. That was a little bit of annoying. We talked about the 3rd and 9 play. You've got, maybe the best quarterback in the entire country right now, and you're going to take the ball and try to run it 9 yards against a team that hasn't let you run at all. I have some theories, though, Chip, about the running game, and I wonder if we can maybe discuss that a little bit. I've got a theory that because the passing game has stepped up, because a lot of people are talking about how, now we have a passing game, suddenly we can't run the ball. I think because the passing game has been so sharp, there's not a concerted effort to be patient and consistent in the running game this year, and that's causing the running game to not have any rhythm, partly. It's also causing the team to go away from runs on downs that in the past they would have run the ball. They have I would say, for me, the poor running seems to be outside. Usually the inside runs have been getting anywhere from 4 to 6 yards depending on the play. Now, that's not every play. There's some of those are bottled up. But I think that if in years past an Ohio State team might run on first and second down. Even if they didn't get anywhere on first, the second down play might net you 6 or 7 yards, and then you're back in front of the chains again, and you've got a manageable third down. But I think there's a lot of that. The cutback run that J.K. Dobbins runs, sort of a little bit of a counter play, has been successful this year. It really worked well against TCU in a game that TCU had been controlling some portions of, especially on defense. It's the outside runs that seem to be having most of the issues. Weber's been able to bounce a few of those, but that seems to me to be the area. And I just wonder what you thought of the idea that maybe a good passing game and a quarterback like Dwayne Haskins may be not a detriment. Obviously, it's great to have a great quarterback and a good passing game, but maybe it's something that has become a safety blanket for Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day in the play calling department, and maybe that's hurting the running game a little bit in failing to gain any rhythm in the game.
No, I think that's a very good hypothesis. I think anytime you have a quarterback with the talent of Dwayne Haskins, I think it's very easy to fall in love with all of his natural skills. I mean, he powerful arm, he's very accurate, he's very decisive with the ball. As you said, kind of that security blanket that Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day are probably, becoming more and more enamored with. My concern, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts, is there's going to come a day, probably not this weekend against Minnesota, because the early weather forecast looks for it to be a crisp fall day in Ohio Stadium, not pouring down rain. But we've talked about the idea of what do you do on a day when the conditions are not ideal for a passing game. And so my concern is that it's not so much an over-reliance upon Dwayne Haskins, but what do you do when it's not clicking? It's entirely possible that Dwayne Haskins is hitting guys, because we saw earlier in the season, some occasions where hitting receivers right in the hands and they're dropping it. Well, what do you do on a rainy day where it makes it even that much more difficult to catch? One of the things, we'll get into it a little bit further, that was brought up today at Urban Meyer's press conference that I thought was very astute by Lori Schmidt of 105.7. And she initially said, Coach, I apologize if this seems like a stupid question, but and I'm paraphrasing in so many words, is there, a comfort in, the fact that, you can be, 3rd and 7 and feel just as comfortable as you would be at 3rd and 1. And Urban Meyer not only said that was not a stupid question, he acknowledged the fact that 3rd and 1 is a difficulty for the offense now. Both, Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, I think they made a really good point that Ohio State, they're lacking that big power running game, that big back that they've traditionally had, during the Urban Meyer era.
Mm-hmm.
They've had, when Urban Meyer took over, he had a guy like, Carlos Hyde. And then after Carlos Hyde, he had Ezekiel Elliott. And now he doesn't really have, like with JT Barrett, even, like JT Barrett was, enough of a difference maker on short yardage that you felt comfortable. He really, and this is not meant to impugn the toughness of Mike Weber or J.K. Dobbins, but they're not really power backs. I would say, like on the Ohio State roster, probably the closest to a power back is probably Master Teague or Brian Snead, and Brian Snead has been dealing with an unspecified disciplinary issue since the beginning of the season. Haven't seen him, and Master Teague is still kind of, I would guess he's 3rd on the depth chart, and the last few games have been so close that we haven't seen Master Teague. So, that power inside running game, I personally, I would love for Ohio State to be able to, like you said, on 1st and 10, run the ball. And we talked about this the other day, when we were talking about Penn State, being able to, on 1st and 10, sitting there at 2nd and 4, rather than 2nd and 8, when they run the ball. So it's not, I'm going to take victories wherever we can get them. I certainly believe that Ohio State, it's only natural. You're not going to be up for every game. I don't care that it was homecoming or not. After a game as closely fought as the previous week was at Penn State, I'm sure that the Dwayne Haskins admitted it, that the players didn't have the same level of energy they had leading up to the Indiana game. I'm sure there was some fatigue. I'm sure that there was, some aches and bumps and bruises from such a hard fought game. And let's give credit to Indiana too. I think we're discounting the fact that I think Indiana, they have a lot of talented players who they certainly played extremely well against Ohio State. I guess my getting back to my concern is that when it comes to the running game, I would feel much better knowing that Ohio State can run and impose their will when they want to, and so far we haven't really seen that during this season.
Yeah, I agree that we haven't seen it. It's a little bit perplexing because I definitely think that Weber and Dobbins are both guys that are hard-nosed enough guys that can get you a yard or two, but there really has been a lack of really any urgency on those 3rd and 1s and 4th and 1s in terms of it's I'm not talking about going fast because they've done that and sometimes it works and sometimes it backfires spectacularly, but the thing that I like to see is a quick hit and run play. I don't want to see anything that takes some time to develop. I don't want to. I mean, you got to take advantage of the big uglies up front because people are going to be trying to shoot gaps. The linebackers are going to be up, and the safeties are going to be up, and everybody's going to be trying to get up there and gum up the works. You got to hit it quickly to get that yard, and they're not doing that. They're doing these. Okay, get the snap back to Haskins. Haskins kind of sticks the ball out and kind of, is he going to really give it? Is he going to keep it? Just hand the ball and let the guy go just quickly. And, we haven't seen that. And that's, it's been a staple of Ohio State since I was a kid. And we just don't see it at all. The other thing they could do is, there's this position group. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's called a fullback.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe there's not a pure fullback on the team, but you can have somebody act as a fullback. Teams pull out gimmicks all the time in terms of, might use an offensive tackle, backup guard, something like that. Somebody that has a little bit of quicks, could be a tight end. But yeah, give him the ball behind somebody. And Dobbins is a guy he's not terribly big, so if he gets behind somebody that size, he's hard to find. And if you can't find him, he's going to get a yard on you pretty easy. So there's things they can do, and there's things that they should do, but they're not things that they're currently doing, and that's going to be a problem when you're talking about teams from East Lansing and Ann Arbor, because they have the talent level to make Ohio State pay for not being able to pick up those single yard, short yardage situations.
I'm intrigued by the idea of, as you accurately stated, there is no true fullback on Ohio State's roster, but just by mentioning the idea of the tight ends, I'm thinking, somebody like a Luke Farrell or a Rashad Berry could certainly be put in the backfield with Mike Weber and or J.K. Dobbins on, in the I formation. And I don't care if it's, right between the center and guard. I think that Rashad Berry or Luke Farrell could certainly, blast a hole that would allow the tailback to gain that necessary yards. I certainly hope that is something that the offensive coaching staff is contemplating.
Try this on for size. Fullback Robert Landers.
be still my heart.
The
only thing that would make that better is if he got to actually carry the ball, because that's what he would be pestering the coaches with.
Yeah, well, you get the fake handoff, and he goes out on the wheel route, and now you've got Big Bob in space running down the field.
That'd be outstanding.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things that I also want to touch on is that Drew Chrisman is apparently over. He's jumped the shark. He shanked a punt out of his own end zone. It didn't end up hurting Ohio State because Indiana missed a 51-yard field goal on the ensuing drive. But I thought we had to deal with Drew Chrisman. He was going to be our MVP, and we were going to worship him for being our MVP. But that is apparently no longer a thing.
I'm not ready to jump off the bandwagon yet. I'm gonna cut him some slack, considering the fact he was buried deep in his own end zone. There might have been the concern of just getting the punt off versus, that's not to say that he didn't have pressure against Penn State, but it might have just been, a case of concern of, all right, possibly having it blocked in the end zone, or, like a safety or something, like, that he might have just, like, let me just get it and get it out of here as quick as possible, and didn't really put the true Drew Chrisman touch on it that we have come to know and appreciate.
All right, and the third thing is, the Penn State hangover. Is this now a thing? Is this going to be an annual thing now? Obviously, going to Iowa and being home against Indiana are two different things, and thankfully Ohio State was able to overcome it this time. There is something to be said for an emotional game of that magnitude, and then having to come back a week later and not really be able to get up for a team that isn't. It would have been interesting to see if it was maybe Michigan State at home or Wisconsin versus Indiana, to see what the level of getting them up would be. But the thing for me that's a problem is that these guys knew what happened last year, and they talked about it early in the week about there's no way it's going to happen again. And it really did look like the team was lethargic and out of sorts. I think that, one of the things that a lot of people pointed out was the penalty trend and how it's continued. But I think there were a lot of different types of penalties in this game than what we've been seeing. A lot more holdings and things of that nature. And it was, to me, just sloppy penalties. I mean, Demetrius Knox not making his block, so he's got to reach around and grab the guy and that kind of thing. And just the manner in which they got the penalties this week seemed different. It seemed like the types of penalties that you pick up when you're not moving your feet or you're not getting into the correct position, and those are the kinds of things that happen when you're not jacked up for a game and your opponent is jacked up for a game, because you knew Indiana was going to come in here thinking, hey, Iowa took them down last year after the big comeback over Penn State. Maybe they're not quite sharp, or maybe they're not quite on their game.
Well, two things. Because, like, I'll address the Penn State hangover issue. I'll address that second. But one thing about Indiana, and I realized that my comments did not make it into the staff picks for the Ozone staff picks. But Gerd can back me up on this, because I did send it via Gmail. And in so many words, I said, something, and this was, if you recall last week, we were pretty close in terms of our final score predictions. Like, I predicted 49-21.
Right.
And I said in my comments to Gerd that I said, every year I think Ohio State fans, they see the schedule, they see it's Indiana, they look at it as a win, and then the game itself is more difficult than Ohio State fans anticipated. And then they remember, it's like this almost every year we play Indiana. I mean, when you think about it, even during the national championship year, and that was when, Jalen Marshall kind of, he had, a great game against Indiana at home, but Ohio State had to rally. That was when Kevin Wilson was the head coach,
right?
And then
he sparked the comeback with the punt return. It was like
that's right,
very lackadaisical effort until that punt return. It kind of jacked up the whole team,
right? And so then when you think, last year was the season opener, and Indiana was beating Ohio State at the half, and then Ohio State kind of came out in the second half and took care of business. And when you think about Indiana, like they were just not going to go gently into that dark night, so to speak, for Ohio State. They were bound and determined, to be competitive. Now, granted, in the second half, they weren't nearly as competitive as they were in the first, but they were competitive. I will tell you that, when it comes to next season, because I've already looked it up, is Ohio State is at Indiana on September 14th. And that is the first Big Ten game at least for Ohio State. I didn't bother to look and see if it was for Indiana, but I'd be willing to bet that it is. I'm willing to bet. Guess what? I'm willing to bet that that's going to be a night game in Bloomington, because like how jacked those fans are for whenever Ohio State comes to town. So I'm going to say it right now, I'm anticipating a battle no matter, if Ohio State's favored or not. I think Ohio State is, definitely going to have their hands full again. I'll try to remember next year when we start talking about Indiana next year. As far as the other point that you brought up about a Penn State hangover, I certainly hope that you're mistaken, not because I doubt your analysis, but next year when you look at the forecast, the schedule, I should say, the Penn State game is November 23rd, and the very next week is that team up north, up in Ann Arbor. So if there's any kind of a hangover due to Penn State, I'm not going to be pleased about that. So let's just hope that this is, this was kind of, the fact that, Ohio State for the last several years that they've had emotional games against Penn State. But let's give some credit to Indiana, and let's kind of also give let's get some critique, if you will, of kind of some of the things that we've addressed already. The running game was not as consistent. The offensive line didn't play as well. And we've talked about like the defense having to make adjustments that paid off in the second half, but were definitely a cause of concern during the first half.
Yeah, the games really were lopsided in the Tressel era. But in the Urban Meyer era, there's really only been a couple of lopsided wins against Indiana. So you're right there. And like last year was 49-21 in Bloomington, so not too difficult. There was a 38-17 game, but then the year before that was a touchdown in Bloomington. It's only a touchdown difference. There was a 42-27 game in 2014 we just talked about, and then the 42-14 game was the biggest win for Urban Meyer in this series. Over Kevin Wilson in 2013, and then the year before that was the scare, the 52-49 game. So there's been a lot of close games in the series, but I mean, if you go back through history, it's a lopsided win every year for Ohio State, with only a few exceptions, really. Because Indiana's only won 12 times in 80, like 90 games or so, 90 meetings or something like that. So, but it would be nice to get back to that because, you got to have a couple cream puffs in the division because the Big Ten East is a gauntlet. I mean, you got Penn State, Michigan. If Indiana gets good, then you've got one more thing to worry about. Maryland some years can be good. So it's tough, but I wouldn't think there would be any kind of hangover for Penn State if Michigan was the next opponent because they make way too much of a big deal about that, and rightfully so, because that is the rivalry.
I want to give credit to Tom Allen at Indiana because let's face it, the state of Indiana is not a hotbed of football talent.
Mm-hmm.
So what, and then, oh, by the way, Ohio State, we're going to come and plunder some of that talent from you. We're going to take, a McLaurin. We're going to take a Pete Werner. We're going to, you see what I'm saying? Like right. Some guys that could have legitimately been helping Indiana are now playing for Ohio State or other teams.
Yeah.
So I think they make the best of what they get in terms of their home state talent. They also, in this kind of, it's not just Indiana, like a lot of other Big Ten teams, but, they also do their fair share of finding Ohio kids who weren't on the receiving end of Ohio State scholarship offers. Like Peyton Ramsey played very well. He's a Cincinnati Elder kid. Kind of what we had talked about last week. He wasn't nearly as dynamic of a runner as Trace McSorley was for Penn State, but I mean he still was very effective. I mean he was playing well, especially passing the ball against Ohio State. So Tom Allen I think does a really good job. The one thing that I always go back to when it comes to with Indiana is like you said it would be nice to have like another cream puff or two. I think Indiana is definitely, behind, when we talk about, like the big four, when you've got, you've got Ohio State, you got Penn State, you've got Michigan State and Michigan, in whatever kind of order or sequence you want to throw them in. I think Indiana is definitely doing all they can to scrape and claw to be that fifth team.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to, in their mind, they beat Rutgers. I mean, they're 4-2. They beat Rutgers. They still have a game against Maryland at some point. They also have games against Illinois. Like in their mind, like they have to find ways, anything in every way possible, to get to that 6-win threshold to be bowl eligible. So I think they'll do it. Because I was impressed enough with what they did, on both sides of the ball against Ohio State, even though they kind of faded down in the second half.
Yeah, so just to run down quickly the game, Indiana scored first on a field goal. Didn't have a whole lot of trouble moving the ball, it didn't seem like. Of course, a big play is a part of that. A 45-yard run, I think, in that first series.
Yeah.
Really, the only time that Stevie Scott busted loose was that one run. Everything else was pretty well handled, I think, by Ohio State in the run game defensively. So that was one positive. Ohio State turned the ball over a couple of times in the first half. They had a fumble by Mike Weber, an interception, but Ohio State did come back, take two touchdowns, a Dobbins run and a Dixon pass from Haskins, and it made it 14-3. And then you kind of got the sense that Ohio State was waking up, and they were going to cruise maybe, and they were going to avoid that hangover. But then the hangover showed up. It was maybe a case of where Ohio State even thought that, like the Buckeyes may have even thought, okay, here we go, we're fine. And then Indiana came back, scored a couple of touchdowns in the second quarter, and actually took a 17-14 lead. That raised some eyebrows with the national media on Twitter as I was monitoring that. And Ohio State came back, and again, Paris Campbell, an 18-yard pass, makes it 21-17, and then McLaurin makes it 28-17, and you're feeling like, okay, they got control again. And then Indiana puts together a late field goal drive and hits it, makes it an 8-point game at halftime. So it was a signal. That halftime score right before halftime was a signal. Indiana's not going to go away. They're going to be annoying. This isn't going to be the cakewalk we all kind of hoped and wanted it to be. But Ohio State came out in the second half and hit Paris Campbell, who was uncovered, which is a really bad idea. If you're a defensive coordinator, I recommend that you put someone on Paris Campbell. Probably
that's a good idea. That'd be a good call.
Probably a really fast guy, and try to limit what Paris Campbell's going to do, because he's really fast.
Yes. I agree with that.
So it's 35-20 at this point, and Indiana comes back and scores again, and he makes it 35-26. They decide to go for two, chase some points a little early, but okay. And it really was damn near returned for a 2-point conversion the other direction, and that would have been a pretty amazing play. It was one of those plays where it's like, all right, can you maybe pitch the ball to a faster defensive back instead of having the linebacker try to return it the whole way? But at least they broke up the 2-point conversion. And then Ohio State in the fourth quarter, it was all Ohio State. McLaurin again hurting the team from his home state, 17-yard touchdown reception. And then Benjamin Victor with another amazing play. And this is one of these deals where Ben Victor now seems to be making a highlight play every week, and he may get some play in terms of maybe the draft this year, if about coming out.
Well, that's a concern that I have. I mean, I know we're gonna be talking about like the upcoming game is not only you're starting to hear the more audible things about how good Dwayne Haskins is, and should he go out, even though he's only a redshirt sophomore, and all of that. I'm personally, I mean, we're only 6 games in, like I still say, like there's a lot of football to be played. So NFL draft aspirations, I think, should be kind of put on hold. But if there's a legitimate concern I have and it's not something that, I don't want to take away from the fine seasons that Paris Campbell and Johnny Dixon and Terry McLaurin, that they're all having, is for as good and talented as those wide receivers are, the vast majority of the wide receivers are going to be out of eligibility after this season.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben Victor could potentially. I personally, I firmly believe that it's way too early to make those kind of predictions. But I would certainly hope that the Ohio State coaching staff, when it comes to the younger wide receivers on the roster, such like Chris Olave, for example, has played sparingly,
Mm-hmm.
as a true freshman. Get them into the games, because that wide receiver core as a group is just going to be so inexperienced next year. Like that's where Ben Victor, if he sticks around, could truly become, as you said, he could emerge as the leader of that group, if he sticks around, hopefully for another year.
Yeah, it gets tough to figure out what kids will do when the NFL buzz starts happening toward the end of the season. It would be nice. I mean, I love seeing Ben Victor emerge as a threat, and to see him making these types of plays. Certainly, it's too early to really think about what his draft stock might be, but these are the kinds of plays when he makes them. I think, man, this is a guy he's gonna, just his measurables alone are gonna make scouts salivate. I mean, he's a big guy, tall guy, can jump, can run. He's a specimen in terms of size, and he's a good size for NFL receivers. So he's a guy that will be on their radar, and just you kind of want him to tone it down a little bit, Ben. Kind of, it's like make the plays against Michigan and Michigan State. Maybe don't make these plays here. I don't know, but yeah, it's becoming a thing, and it's enjoyable to see him emerging, because it's been something we've waited for a long time. So, Chip, the Buckeyes held Indiana to 84 rushing yards. 45 of that came on one play. So I'd say they did a pretty good job against the run. But on the other side of the ledger, Ohio State only running for 154 yards against Indiana. I don't know where that ranks over the last 20 or 25 trips, or I should say matchups with the Hoosiers, but that's probably on the low end, I'm thinking.
I would agree with you. I think that it goes back to what I was saying, is I really thought that this was going to be a game of, okay, Ohio State, they're going to commit to running the ball. And let's face it, Indiana, they might, schematically might have been, the way that they were lining up might have been goading Ohio State into throwing the ball, knowing full well that, okay, we might get burned, which they were, because, Haskins had arguably, he had a career day, coming within a few yards of the school passing record, single game passing record. But yeah, I really thought this was going to be a game that Ohio State was going to dedicate to running the ball much, much, much better than they have. Dobbins had some moments, so did Weber, but I'm legitimately concerned about Weber's health, because I know he's been nursing a foot injury that has been pretty much throughout the entire season. Mm-hmm. So I'm also hoping that this coming weekend against Minnesota might be an opportunity for him to rest, play maybe the first half, maybe even the first quarter. I'll be honest, if Ohio State doesn't need him, have him sit, because there's a lot of football still to be played, and I'd rather Mike Weber be on the field than off of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of hard to do with a kid like Weber, because he wants to get his carries. He wants to be on the field, and I think he would not want to come out of that rotation. He would not want to do that. If he feels he's good enough to play health wise, he wants to play. So it's kind of hard to back him down and say, look, we gotta take it easy with you. We need you for the end of the season. It's that thing. You don't want to lose the kid. You don't want him to check out mentally because he feels like you're hurting my draft stock now or whatever. I'm not saying that necessarily he's thinking in those terms, but certainly when you're in this type of a rotation, it's really hard for one back to put up eye-popping numbers. So you've got to take every opportunity you can. I think that puts pressures on these kids to play hurt too. So I think that doesn't do him any favors. But But at the same time, the other side of that coin is if you pick one guy, then the other guy gets disgruntled and transfers out. So I guess it's a good problem to have.
Oh yeah, I mean it certainly is. I just think Mike Weber, Gerd has made this point in the past, and he's right. Is when you think about Mike Weber's career at Ohio State, and he's had his share of ups and downs, and one of the things that Gerd has pointed out, and it's just factually accurate, is there has not been a season that Mike Weber has played at Ohio State that has been injury free.
Right.
When you think of his true freshman year, he had to redshirt because he sustained an injury in training camp. And then at the end of his redshirt freshman year, he ran for over 1,000 yards, but he was, kind of battling injury then. And then, last year, he had the nagging hamstring injury. And now this year, he has, the nagging foot injury. And it's not enough that it's going to keep teams from drafting him. But let's be honest, when it comes to the NFL draft, I mean, you have to be a pretty special talent to warrant high draft status. I mean, a case in point being is, for example, Leonard Fournette, who had, a solid career at LSU, high pick by the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's been battling injuries this entire season. Yep. So you're going to tell me a guy that was, even more decorated coming out of college, who was, a top 10 pick. I can't remember the precise pick by Jacksonville. I know it was in the top 10, and he's battling injury. That's what makes teams reluctant to invest high draft choices in running backs. But, I definitely think Mike Weber, my point is, I know he wants to make the most of his opportunities. I would just rather, if those opportunities are going to be made, that they be made against those teams from the Mitten State, as you might refer to them, when Ohio State truly needs them, versus, and this is not meant disrespectfully towards Minnesota. I would rather, okay, Mike, great game. You carried it 10 times for, let's just say 78 yards or whatever. I'm just making stuff up. And a touchdown, and we're going to sit you down. And same thing for J.K. And I'd rather it be the Master Teague, Damari McCall, that kind of show in the second half, rather than putting unnecessary carries and shots on either of our two starter capable tailbacks.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. But I also, and I agree with Gerd, but the thing is, that's just one more thing putting pressure on the kid to play when he's dinged up, because that's a question you're going to get at the combine is, why didn't you play in that game? Then you're going to say you're hurt, and and that that's a black mark on your in the column, the negative column, and then that could cost you. I don't know how much, depends on how far you slide. So yeah, everything, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of outside things on these kids that really go into all of this stuff that we talk about. It's easy for us to sit back and watch it on TV and opine about it, and it's much more difficult to be in that situation. So hopefully Mike Weber will get healthy, stay healthy, and have a productive season. The other thing too about the platoon situation at running back, I love that these guys are fresh in the fourth quarter, but I would also say that maybe some more emphasis needs to be put on the first half with these two guys. Show me what you got, and whichever one of you has got the hot hand, we're going to ride you in the down the stretch, and that might actually incite a little bit more urgency into the earlier parts of the game. Not that these guys are not playing hard, but I think that it's just that much more competition, and I think it would maybe help the run game a little bit. It might even be what this running game needs a little bit.
No, I think that's a sound argument. If using that logic, I would definitely have said J.K. Had the hotter hand in the first half, just by not so much even by running the ball, but like some of the he had another one of those. I don't want to call it patented, but one of those nice one-handed receptions that out of the backfield. Because he certainly I think his value as as a on the field, besides just running the ball, I think he's a more natural receiver And I think he has, I think his lateral agility and quickness, like he kind of showed, in terms of, going from side to side and making people miss. I think he definitely, using your logic, I think would have probably had that, so to speak, hot hand in the first half and might have warranted more touches.
Yeah, you could be right. He ended up with twice as many carries as Weber and only 12 more yards, and a much lower average. But again, some of that goes to play calling and situation of the game too. I mean, if you happen to be the running back in the 2-minute drill, you're not going to get the carries that the running back will, at the start of the first quarter. So there's a lot that goes into it, and at this point, I'm just enjoying that we have two really good running backs, and hopefully the running lanes will start opening for those guys soon. I think that the offensive line, we didn't talk about them much yet, but none of the offensive linemen graded out as champions this week. That's very telling against Indiana. That might be the first time that's happened against Indiana, that no offensive lineman has graded out as a champion since Urban Meyer has been here. I could be wrong because I don't track these things, but one guy I think is really getting hammered lately and has really kind of fallen off is Malcolm Pridgeon. I think that Pridgeon has had a rough couple of games.
I would agree with you. I mean, we already talked about Demetrius Knox also, in terms of having, he had a rough game against Indiana. But, yeah, Malcolm Pridgeon has had a couple rough games. And I don't think it was entirely coincidental that at his press conference, the name Brandon Bowen was brought up, and he's getting healthier, he's getting closer to coming back. So to kind of, if there's pressure on anybody, along that line, hey, we've got somebody who was very capable and is probably very hungry and eager to get back on the field. If you guys can't do it, we'll find somebody who can. So I agree with you. I think Malcolm Pridgeon, and Knox definitely need to step up their game. Thayer Munford also, in terms of, because you brought that up in your column, like the outside pass rush. Both, Munford and Prince, in terms of the outside pass rushers putting pressure on Dwayne Haskins.
Right.
They need to. I realize we're talking about the running game, but like you said, the offensive line, it was not really it was not a stellar performance by the entire unit.
Right. I thought they played better against Penn State than they did against Indiana, quite frankly. And again, we go back to, was there a letdown? Was there not as much emotion in this game on the Ohio State sideline? And therefore, because there was high emotion on the Indiana sideline, maybe that played into that. And it could have. And, we'll see how they bounce back. Now that they'll have another week removed from that comeback. The great thing about it is, again, it's a 49-26 win that the coaches can be mad at the players about all week and get on them about it. And so, I'd much rather have that than just barely be squeaking by and everybody be, happy. It's a different situation than the Penn State game for sure.
Yeah, these are nice problems to have, yeah. Right? Like we, like think about, okay, like we're complaining about, they only won by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, right.
let's put this in perspective. Are there things that are concerning? Sure. Are we disappointed that Ohio State didn't play with more urgency and intensity than they did? Absolutely. But yeah, they came out with a win. They're 6-0. And as you said, like there are things that are concerning if they're concerning to us, the coaching staff certainly, they're aware of it. Urban Meyer kind of alluded to at his press conference. If anything, I felt like a sense of vindication, if you will, during the broadcast, because we talk about why is the Ohio State coaching staff trying to make Dwayne Haskins run the ball, like as you said, instead of trying to make Dwayne like JT, how about in your column, like Dwayne just be Dwayne, like let him, when he runs, it should be something that suits him. And it seemed from my perspective that late in the game when he would drop back to pass, and if he was flush from the pocket, that's kind of what I've always envisioned his running should be. It should be, okay, nothing's open downfield. I'm not going to force the ball into coverage. I'm going to score. Excuse me. I'm going to gain positive yardage. Granted, it's not going to be, to the same extent as JT Barrett had the ability to do, but I'm going to still gain positive yardage. I'm going to slide down, avoid the hit. That's kind of what I envision Dwayne Haskins as a runner in this offense. And speaking of defense, at halftime, I'm not sure if you saw it, James Laurinaitis was very critical of Ohio State's defensive efforts. So, as I said a few moments ago, the idea of a sense of vindication that, okay, other people are saying it, like like Brady Quinn and I can't remember who the other person was in the booth with him. Why are they trying to run Dwayne Haskins? Okay, good. Like, they agree with us. And, James Laurinaitis is pointing out his concerns about the big plays that the defense was giving up.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of concern about that. And of course, again, we had bad angles taken on the 45-yard run. I think that there's definitely time for Jocelyn Wint to become a good player. But right now, he's not a very good player, and he shouldn't be out there. It should be Wade or Pryor with Jordan Fuller. I think that what we saw once Shaun Wade came into the game, the defense stabilized a little bit, and then when Pryor came in the second half, it solidified things a little more. Just to wrap up the offense, great day for, of course, Haskins coming within a whisker of breaking Art Schleicher's school record. 455 yards is nothing to sneeze at, and it's the most ever yards passing in an Ohio State victory. Because Art Schleicher lost that game to Florida State where he threw for 458. 33 of 44, not too shabby, although there were some misses. He missed a wide-open K.J. Hill for what would have been a touchdown. He missed a wide-open J.K. Dobbins on a swing pass that was wide open. So there could have been a lot more yards there had he been a little sharper in those two situations. And he could have set the new record for touchdown passes because that K.J. Hill one was definitely going for 7. And I'm not sure if Dobbins might have been able to score on his, actually, because he was out in a lot of space. And J.K. Dobbins in space is a wonderful thing to watch. So anyway, good day for Haskins. Could have been better. He threw 2 interceptions, but he was pressured on both. He was hit as he threw on the second one. I think he was hit just after he threw on the first one. And that also came a play after he had his bell rung really hard. He had run the ball. They blew the whistle. Indiana backed him up 3 yards and slammed him down anyway. And there was no penalty on the play for, I guess, reasons that I don't know what they were, but that should have been a flag. Anyway, so getting back to the defense, Jocelyn Wint, I just touched on him. Tough Borland, second week in a row he's forced a fumble, and that was actually a pretty big play because that was about a 9-yard gain for the receiver there. But Borland was able to hack that ball out of his hand, and Ohio State recovered. The linebackers are still a work in progress. Of course, we lost a couple linebackers in this game, or at least one linebacker and one defensive end. And, overall, again, the run defense did pretty well. Pass defense, I know Urban Meyer touched on this, but I noticed it in the first half as well when the game was going on. Where was the quarterback pressure in that first half? This is a defensive line that should have been eating up Indiana's offensive line and getting pressure on Peyton Ramsey, and he really didn't seem all that troubled for much of the first half.
Yeah, I mean, I think you also pointed out in your article, Chase Young was called with a penalty, when he was applying pressure.
Yeah.
With like a blow to the head.
Yes. The old blow to the head in the back of the shoulder. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it definitely. I mean, there was a lot of things to be concerned about. I completely agree with you. I mean this with no ill will toward Jocelyn Wint. I think now, without having, I've never even met the young man. I think now it's all psychological. I think now, he seems like he's out there and he is so afraid of making mistakes that he's playing worse. because he's overthinking it. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I that's just a amateur observation. I just think that, as you said, it was not. I did not find it coincidental whatsoever that as soon as Sean Wade and then, as you said, Isaiah Pryor came in, that the secondary play solidified dramatically. Like I have often been very, very critical of Damon Arnett, in the past, because I sometimes think that, he kind of likes to, talk trash and play, play as though he's better than he actually is. But he sometimes has his moments where he actually does just make really good sound plays. I mean, Brady Quinn kind of pointed him out during the broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that the secondary coaches have figured out that Jocelyn Wint, the best thing that could happen to him is to play him exclusively on special teams for the next game or two. And then, let's see where he is. Maybe if there is a big lead, putting him back in, to try and regain some of that confidence that maybe he's lost.
I agree. It's just not working for him right now, and you got to put your best foot forward. And right now, he's not part of the Buckeyes' best foot, I guess. That's a bad metaphor or analogy, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, only 3 sacks.
I know what you mean.
3 sacks for 11 yards for Ohio State. Did you? I didn't think they would only be able to get 3 sacks on Indiana's quarterback. I really expected a bigger day. Of course, Draymond's playing hurt, so that's part of it. I mean, he's still graded out as a champion. Chase Young, of course, he probably should have had, he should have had more. Let's just say the Indiana offensive linemen were really, really glad to meet Chase Young, and they were really friendly guys who just wanted to give him a big hug. And they were.
Yes.
They were giving him big
Yes.
hugs all
Very,
day. Just very friendly guys from Indiana. Indiana's a friendly place.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah, I think that's going to be something that Chase Young, I guess he's going to have to just, I guess get used to the overly affectionate offensive lineman of the Big Ten for the remainder of the 2018 season, because I anticipate that is going to be his lot in life, especially with Nick Bosa being out.
Yeah.
That's he's going to be singled out, and let's face, he kind of, the performance that he had against Rutgers, even as well as what he did against Penn State, the opposing offensive line coaches around the conference, they see that the sheer talent he possesses. So if anything, it's going to be more incumbent upon Ohio State, the other defensive lineman, one of who had his first sack on Saturday, was Tyreek Smith,
Mm-hmm.
who, as a true freshman, making one of those sacks. So, we always, and deservedly so, sing pieces of Larry Johnson. Let's hope that this coming game against Minnesota is going to be more of an opportunity to get some of those other defensive linemen, such as Tyreek Smith, such as Tyler Friday, other defensive line, interior defensive Taogiai, get them into the rotation as much as possible, so you can rest Draymond Jones, so you can rest Chase Young, so you can rest Robert Landers, so he can be called upon on on that wheel route when we need him.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Malik Harrison, Jordan Fuller, and Jocelyn Wint all ended up with 5 tackles to pace the defense. Fuller had a fumble recovery as well. Of course, tackles for losses and sacks. Pete Werner had a sack. Borland, of course, a sack and a forced fumble and an additional tackle for loss. And Draymond Jones had a sack. And they didn't give one to Tyreek Smith on this, so I guess he didn't get credit. But Tommy Togiai had a nice tackle for loss as well. A good job by the defense on the run. Not so good on the pass. But the one good thing you could say, we talked about this before, James Franklin said Penn State ran out of gas down the stretch against Ohio State. And Allen, he said the same thing for Indiana last year, and it happened again, Chip, because my last point on this game before we move on is fourth quarter time of possession. Ohio State had the ball for 12 minutes 11 seconds in the fourth quarter. Indiana only 2:49. Really dominated the fourth quarter.
Yeah, Indiana, I think they give everything they've got, but let's face it. I mean, the talent and the depth that Ohio State possesses, there aren't too many teams around the country, let alone within the Big Ten, that can rival the Buckeyes. Regardless of whether we're talking, offensive line, defensive line, running backs, wide receivers, you name it. Ohio State is very, very, very fortunate to have the quality backups that they can liberally bring in the fourth quarter to help sustain or build upon the leads that they have, and Indiana just couldn't compete with that.
Yeah. All right. So for his efforts, Dwayne Haskins was named Offensive Player of the Week in the Big Ten for the fourth time already this year, if I remember correctly, and it's 2 in a row for Dwayne.
Yeah, fourth time in 6 games. Think about that.
Yeah, that's not too bad. So I don't know what the record is for that particular award, but only 1 or 2 more times probably will equal the record. Of course, you can argue that maybe he should have, at the very best, shared that honor with Trace McSorley last week, but I'm sure Dwayne's not going to lose any sleep about winning that award over Trace McSorley since he won the game.
Right. I mean, I think, like you said, coming within, a few yards of breaking the single game passing record, he certainly warranted the award for this week. And I'm starting to, see things on Twitter, people saying, just give him the silver football, that's awarded for the Big Ten most valuable player. People are already making that kind of claim.
Well, it's definitely hard to argue that he's not the most valuable player in the league when you consider the running game struggles for Ohio State and the defensive struggles. He has been the shining light for the Buckeyes this year in keeping that offense on track and scoring lots of points. So we will turn our attention now, Chip. Actually, before we move on to Minnesota, you probably had a couple of points you wanted to bring up from Urban's press conference.
Yeah, I already mentioned earlier about how Laurie Schmidt had brought up about the Urban confirmed the concerns that he has about third and short. So, Urban Meyer definitely, he is of the opinion that, that's something that they have to work on. We already talked about the idea of, possibly like Bowen coming back. He's getting closer and closer. And then as far as, some of the other players, you talked about, for example, like Jonathan Cooper, Malik Harrison, that they should know very soon. He did not say that in terms of what was ailing them, but by all indications, it seems that they are going to be able to play against Minnesota this coming Saturday.
Well, that's a big relief. You never want to see multiple starting defensive players going off on a cart during the game.
No, not at all.
It's not usually a good sign. It's usually a bad sign. But it's good to hear. But of course, the thing that reminds me of too is that you were talking about Chase Young getting used to the overly friendly and affectionate offensive lineman in the Big Ten, and that really is going to be his lot in life without Bosa on the other side. There's really no reason for them not to key on Chase Young with Bosa out. Of course, Chase Young, a lot more freedom to run around and create havoc when you've got a Nick Bosa on the other side that's taken up so much of the opposition's attention. So it was to be expected. Ohio State needs to adjust, and part of that adjustment could be, the way that Davon Hamilton's played and the way that we've seen Landers play at times, and even I'm really excited about Tommy Togiai, the way he's coming on already. I really wouldn't mind if we saw Draymond Jones play a little bit more on the edge, because there were a few times in that game where there was just no setting of the edge, and I think the 45-yard run was one of those where the defensive end crashed down and there was just no one inside. or no one outside to force that play back. And then, of course, it's exacerbated when the safety takes a bad angle, and then you've got a 45-yard run, and then you've got a team like Indiana hanging around early and being excited and thinking they can make big plays. And it's a big mess. The defense is a work in progress, but the great shaman will figure it out, I'm sure, at some point.
I almost forgot about that.
Never forget, Chip. Never forget. Minnesota, the Golden Gophers. They're averaging 27.8 points per game, so that's not really much off of what Indiana was racking up, but they're giving up 23.4. So Minnesota's barely on average, outscoring their opponents, and the Gophers are 3-2. Of course, their 3 wins. New Mexico State, yawn. Fresno State, that was a close one. Okay, maybe you got something there. Miami of Ohio, no. And then a bad loss at Maryland, just an absolutely lopsided loss there. And then they did put up a little bit of a fight against Iowa, but that's a trophy game, so you always have to keep in mind that they're going to play a little harder in those games. But still, Iowa wins on the road there, 48-31. What are you gonna, what are some of the things you're looking for out of the Golden Gophers this weekend?
Well, they have a true freshman quarterback, a walk-on by the name of Zach Anixtad, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his last name. He's had his struggles. Ohio State fans, we were just talking about, be careful, what you wish for, count your blessings kind of a thing. Zach Anixtad, his stats, he has been prone to throwing interceptions and having them, be very costly, not just in terms of, lost possessions for the Golden Gophers, but being returned for pick sixes. And so when you ask me what I'm going to be looking for, is we were just lamenting the lack of the pass rush. Let's see how he does against that Ohio State pass rush this coming weekend. So that's going to be one of the things I'm going to be looking for. And the other is you asked me a moment ago about what Urban Meyer talked about in terms of at his press conference. And I might have the number wrong, but he said, I think it was like number 45 or number 46, defensive end for Minnesota, is a great player. You know how Urban Meyer likes to, just kind of give the jersey number and not the player's name. I'm gonna cut Urban Meyer some slack here, because I'm sure I'm gonna butcher this young man's name. Certainly not intentional, but the defensive end that I believe he's talking about is Winston DeLatta-Bouder. Okay, Winston DeLatta-Bouder is, I believe, who he's talking about. If the jersey number is accurate, that's who he would be talking about. I know that you have confessed in the past about not following recruiting very closely, but Minnesota does actually have a player on their roster that Ohio State recruited, but he being a Minnesota boy, he decided to stay home. And they play him at defensive end. His name is Carter Coughlin. And he also, just that we were talking about things we're concerned about. Well, let's see how these defensive ends do against that Ohio State offensive line that, as you so accurately stated, did not grade out a single champion. Let's see if the offensive line rebounds against this fearsome pass rush that Urban Meyer is concerned about.
Well, I can't remember the last time an Ohio State cornerback picked off a pass and scored. So maybe it's a case of the resistible force meeting the movable object then.
Okay, there you go.
But yeah, the 8 touchdowns, 5 interceptions for Minnesota's freshman quarterback, Zach Anixtad, which I do believe you're saying it right. I can't think of another way you would say it. He's completing just over 52% of his passes, less than 1,000 yards on the season so far, 6.5 yards per attempt. He's throwing for 185 yards a game. That if Ohio State's defense doesn't get any better, that will go up. But I think that Ohio State will probably have plenty of answers. I think that this is a further removed they get from Penn State. I think it'll settle the team down, and I expect that Ohio State will come out and handle business against Zach Anixtad. And yeah, it would be nice to see a pick six from a cornerback because we haven't seen that in a while. And actually, would like to see something like that happen for Jordan Fuller too, because it would be nice to see him rewarded for all of what he does. Because I think that as much as we talk about him, and as much as he's definitely recognized as being one of the, if not the best player on the defense with Nick Bosa out, um, I still think he's underrated. I still think he flies under the radar nationally. I think he's just too good of a player to go unnoticed, and the way that I think he has, nationally, and I think that it'd be good to see him score a touchdown.
Yeah, and we were just talking about, some of the backup players. This is the kind of game that Ohio State gets a big lead. I know that, we were just singing the praises of Dwayne Haskins, deservedly so. I will be shocked if Dwayne Haskins plays at all in the second half. This is the kind of game that Ohio State is heavily favored. I'm kind of anticipating, something more along the lines of, what we saw a few games ago, against Rutgers, against Tulane, that Dwayne Haskins puts up, some gaudy numbers in the first half, and then it's the Tate Martell show, in the second half. And let's see, some of those younger wide receivers that I was just talking about. And, oh, by the way, like Jeremy Ruckert, here's your chance to, make an impact, that kind of thing. Like, that's what I'd really like, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, as many of the reserves as possible, playing them to get them that needed game experience.
Yeah, Minnesota, you talk about the freshman quarterback. Their top two running backs are freshmen as well. Bryce Williams has 311 yards this year. Mohamed Ibrahim, 258 yards this year. One touchdown between them. That's not going to get it done most of the time. Their leading scorer on the ground, 5 touchdowns from sophomore wide receiver Seth Green.
Yeah, well, because, Minnesota, they're coming in. They lost Rodney Smith, who was coming into the 2018 season, their best running back.
Yeah.
Lost him to injury. We talked about Antoine Winfield Jr. He's been lost for the season to injury. So
yeah, that's too
Minnesota, bad. Yeah, it's always unfortunate when a team has injury afflictions. But I think that, let's face it, I think that the talent gap was already there between Ohio State and Minnesota, and these injuries that the Golden Gophers have sustained have certainly not aided their cause.
Absolutely not. So, Ohio State and Minnesota, it's a noon kickoff, I believe. Is that the first one this year at noon?
Something?
Or is it the second, maybe?
I want to say that it is the second, because Oregon State, now that I look back on it, Oregon State was a noon kickoff.
Okay.
It's been first one since week 1, and this is, from what I always, it's one of these things where, on Mondays at 11 a.m. on Twitter, just kind of note, that's when the Big Ten will announce the games, in that 10-day window that they do. Like, for example, it was announced, I know we're talking about Minnesota, but it was announced that the game at Purdue is on October 20th is a 7:30 kickoff. So anyway, last week when it was announced that the Minnesota game was a noon kickoff, I can't remember which of the beat writers said this, but they basically said there was like the beat writers that were waiting for Urban Meyer's press conference let out an audible cheer that it was a noon kickoff, because all the beat writers, as much as the fans love the night games and the hoopla and the hype and everything, the beat writers love being able to get their stories in and being able to get back home in a timely fashion. So, Minnesota, I think that it was not meant disrespectfully, but I think with some of the other games that are going to be happening throughout the Big Ten, you have Michigan State at Penn State, you've got Wisconsin at Michigan. I think it was a logical candidate for Ohio State, Minnesota to be a noon kickoff.
Minnesota's defense is ranked 21st in the country in total defense. Are they going to be annoying? Is this going to be an annoying game?
I think it has the potential for the first half. I'm optimistically saying Ohio State by the end of the first half will have a substantial lead. That's my. I know we haven't done final score predictions yet, but
Right.
that's what I'm thinking.
All right. So I think they're 37th nationally against the pass and 39th against the rush. They only give up about a little over 300 yards a game total, so that's actually pretty good. But again, they haven't played a lot of really top-notch opponents yet. I'm
Right.
feeling pretty good about this game, Chip. What do you think? What's the final score going to be on Saturday?
I'm going Ohio State 56, Minnesota 14.
56-14. All right. Okay. I'm going to go 52-17, and I'm guaranteeing a Tate Martell sighting.
Okay.
Got to see Tate.
Like it.
All right. Got to have some Tate.
Yeah.
And we got to have some Master Teague in this game.
That'd be both would be welcome sights.
All right. Well, we'll come back next week. We'll talk about Ohio State against Minnesota. And we will, of course, look ahead to the night game at Ross-Ade. That's going to be annoying because that's one of those. That's
always scary.
It's
always scary.
We have some jitters, where it comes to Purdue because they've lost games to Purdue they shouldn't have lost. They've had unnecessarily close wins against Purdue that they should have won more handily. And now Purdue's got a pretty good offense, not too bad of a defense, although they are prone to giving up some points and some plays. But the offense, their offense against what Ohio State has shown defensively this year is a bit scary. And a night game when everybody's jacked up, national TV, because that's an ABC game, I believe. It's going to be it's going to be tricky, and that could be one of those games where the wind is kind of tricky, maybe, and kind of hinders Dwayne Haskins' deep ball a little bit. I mean, it's hard to say what's going to happen in the negativity field of West Lafayette, Indiana.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I don't want to be freaking out, a week well in advance.
Let's not look past Goldie.
Let's
not overlook Goldie. Let's focus.
Let's focus and get to 7-0.
All right, let's do that. Oh my God, we played 6 games already this season. Boy, this season, Chip.
I know.
I talk about it every week how it's flying by, but it really is flying by.
They always do. Unfortunately.
Now they say that time.
That's why you got to enjoy them.
Time flies when you're having fun, and we're having fun so far this year. The defense gets a little bit more tightened up, and we'll be all set. All we really need is it's too bad we don't have any fullbacks, so we can convert to linebacker, isn't it?
I'm telling you, the BB Landers, the fullback, that is something that we've got to make happen.
Is there any Boren brothers left? Are all the Boren brothers done?
I think Urban's he's trying to coax them into having another child. Same thing with the Boses, but that might be a little tall. That might be a tall order.
Well, Ohio State is one of the Chip, as you're well aware, Ohio State is one of the leading academic institutions in the world. Fantastic facilities and resources at their disposal, and yet no one has yet been able to clone a Bosa.
We can only hope that there are top scientists working around the clock secretly.
Are they even trying at this point? Why don't they just make the whole defense out of a Bosa?
That's right. Kind of like the black box thing, with the plane.
Exactly. All right. Next week, we will be back. We'll talk about the Minnesota game. We'll look ahead to Purdue, and we'll talk about anything else that comes up in the meantime. You have our predictions, so you can laugh at us later about them. Chip, where can people find you on the interwebs?
They can find me on Twitter at Chip Minnich, Minich is how you spell my last name. Like Michael, I'm a contributor to the ozone.net on the Hazen and Cannon area, as well as I can be found on as a contributor for Athlon Sports.
All right, you can find me at Mike36Fan on Twitter, also known as the Grumpy Old Buckeye at Hazen Cannon at the-ozone.net. And of course, subscribe, please, or pass along our information to your friends and have them subscribe to the Silver Bullets podcast. We enjoy putting this together for you, and thank you for listening. We've had really great numbers this year, and we're grateful to each and every one of you who listens to us babble each week about the Buckeyes.
Yes, absolutely, and as well as our colleagues on the Ozone Radio Network as well.
Yes, listen to the Sons of Schmidt, the Buckeye Sloopcast, Across the Field with Tony Gerdeman. Did I leave anybody out?
No, you got them all.
That's all of them. All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back. I keep saying that, but we will. I promise. And we'll do it all again. So until next week, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.